Thursday, November 14th, 2024, 10:47 a.m. The morning arrived, wrapped in that peculiar gray light that seems reserved exclusively for funerals, as though the sky itself understands the weight of goodbye. Marcus Bennett stood in the third pew of St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in suburban Philadelphia, his 6-foot frame rigid with grief, his sandy brown hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it too many times. At 42 years old, he'd built a successful career as a civil engineer, designing bridges and infrastructure, solid, dependable structures meant to last generations. His father had taught him that, build things that endure, build things you can trust. Now his father was gone. The polished mahogany casket sat 15 feet away, draped with an American flag honoring Robert Bennett's 20 years of military service. The scent of lilies hung heavy in the air, mixing with the old church smell of wood polish and ancient hymnals. Marcus's mother sat to his left, her pale, trembling hands clutching a damp handkerchief, her 70-year-old face carved with devastation. To his right sat his wife of 9 years, Janelle. Janelle Bennett was 38, a strikingly beautiful black woman with high cheekbones, intelligent dark eyes, and natural hair she'd recently cut into a stylish tapered cut. She worked as a marketing director for a mid-sized pharmaceutical company, a position she'd held for 5 years. She wore a perfectly tailored black dress, pearl earrings that had been a gift from Marcus's father on their 5th anniversary, and an expression that should have been somber, but instead seemed distracted. Marcus noticed it during Reverend Patterson's opening prayer, a quick flick of Janelle's wrist, her eyes darting downward to check the slim silver watch on her left arm. The gesture was subtle, practiced, but unmistakable. He felt a flutter of irritation, immediately suppressed. She's grieving too, he told himself. Dad loved her like his own daughter. But then it happened again, and again. Throughout the first hymn, Amazing Grace, Janelle's soprano voice, usually so confident in church, wavered as her gaze dropped to that watch. During his cousin David's reading from Ecclesiastes, she checked it twice, within 3 minutes. By the time Marcus's college roommate stood to deliver remembrances about Robert's passion for coaching Little League and his terrible dad jokes, Janelle had glanced at her watch 7 times that Marcus had counted. The gesture became a metronome of wrongness, ticking away beneath the funeral's solemnity. Each time she did it, something cold and formless began to take shape in Marcus's chest. Not quite suspicion, not quite anger, but something adjacent to both. He found himself watching her from the corner of his eye instead of listening to stories about his father's life. Her jaw was tight. Her left knee bounced almost imperceptibly. She looked like someone waiting for something, and that realization felt like a betrayal all its own. 11:23 a.m. Marcus stood at the lectern, his father's eulogy printed on pages that trembled in his hands. He'd spent 3 sleepless nights writing it, trying to capture a lifetime of fishing trips and woodworking lessons, of quiet wisdom dispensed while changing oil in the driveway, of unwavering support through Marcus's divorce from his first wife and his eventual happiness with Janelle. My father taught me that integrity isn't about grand gestures, Marcus began, his voice thick. It's about the small choices you make when no one's watching. It's about... The piercing electronic beep cut through his words like a knife. His father's watch, the vintage 1970 seconds Timex that Marcus had slipped onto his own wrist that morning, still set to his father's routines, suddenly screamed its alarm into the hushed sanctuary. The sound was absurdly loud, comically inappropriate, a mechanical shriek that shattered the reverent silence. Heads turned, someone gasped. Marcus fumbled with the watch, his face burning with embarrassment and fresh grief as he frantically pressed buttons to silence it. But in that chaotic moment, he saw Janelle's reaction. She went rigid, her entire body jerking as though she'd been struck. Her face, which had been merely anxious before, drained of color until her brown skin looked almost gray. Her eyes went wide, not with embarrassment for Marcus, but with something that looked unmistakably like panic, no, like terror. Her hand flew to her purse, clutching it against her side. She half rose from her seat, then sat back down, her breathing visibly rapid even from 15 feet away. Marcus managed to stop the alarm. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. He stumbled through the rest of his eulogy on autopilot, the words meaningless now, because his engineer's mind trained to notice structural weaknesses, to spot the cracks before catastrophic failure was suddenly working overtime. That wasn't the reaction of someone embarrassed by an unfortunate disruption. That was the reaction of someone who heard an alarm clock and realized they were late for something critical. Something they were desperate not to miss. 11:41 a.m. Janelle's phone buzzed during the closing prayer. Marcus felt it more than heard it, the vibration transmitted through the wooden pew they shared. She snatched it up with unseemly haste, glanced at the screen, and her face went from gray to ashen. Without a word, without even the courtesy of waiting for the amen, she stood and hurried down the side aisle toward the church's foyer, her heels clicking urgently against the stone floor. Marcus watched her go, his mother's hand in his father's flag-draped casket before him, and felt the first real crack in the foundation of his life. He found her 10 minutes later in the church parking lot, pacing beside their Volvo SUV, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, urgent, and as he approached, he caught fragments. "Told you I couldn't. And not today. For God's sake," his father just. And finally, in a tone that turned his blood cold, "How much time do I have?" She saw him and ended the call abruptly, shoving the phone into her purse with shaking hands. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked, though he could see it clearly wasn't. "Fine. Work thing. Crisis with the Reynolds campaign launch. I told them I'm at a funeral," but she was talking too fast, not meeting his eyes. "Janelle, I should get back inside. Your mom needs us." She brushed past him, leaving Marcus standing alone in the November cold, his father's watch heavy on his wrist, and that formless thing in his chest solidifying into dread. If you enjoy stories of shocking betrayals, hidden secrets, and justice served cold, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new stories here every day, each one more intense than the last one. And tell me where you are watching from. Friday, November 15th, 2024, 2:17 a.m. Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in their king-sized bed in their renovated colonial home in Wayne, Pennsylvania, listening to Janelle's too careful breathing beside him. She wasn't asleep either. He could tell from the tension in her body, the way she held herself too still. His father's watch sat on the nightstand, its face glowing faintly in the darkness. Marcus reached for it, studying the alarm time that had disrupted the funeral. 11:23 a.m. An oddly specific time. His father had been meticulous about routines, but this particular alarm setting meant nothing to Marcus. He rose quietly, padding downstairs to his home office, the converted sunroom where he did design work and paid bills. The house was silent, except for the old radiators ticking to life. He sat at his desk and did something he'd never done in 9 years of marriage. He opened Janelle's filing cabinet. She kept her personal documents there, tax returns, insurance policies, her mother's estate papers, from when she died 6 years ago. Marcus had never looked through it. Trust, his father had taught him, was fundamental. Without it, nothing else mattered. But his hands were moving anyway, pulling open drawers, searching for something he couldn't name. He found it in the bottom drawer, buried beneath old employee handbooks, a manila folder stuffed with papers, hidden like contraband. The first document was a credit card statement from Chase, addressed to Janelle Bennett. The balance made his breath catch. $47,892.73. The minimum payment due was $1,243. The due date had been 3 days ago. A late fee of $125 had been added. The interest rate, Marcus blinked, certain he was misreading, was 28.99%. His hands trembled as he pulled out the next statement. Capital One, balance, $38,671.28, also past due. Then Discover, $29,443.65. Then American Express, $52,118.47. The numbers swam before his eyes. He spread the statements across his desk like evidence at a crime scene, his engineer's brain automatically calculating the total, over $168,000 in credit card debt. In Janelle's name alone, debt he'd known nothing about. But the credit cards weren't the worst of it. Beneath them were loan documents from companies he'd never heard of, payday lenders, with predatory names like Quick Cash Solutions and Instant Approval Financial. Personal loans with interest rates that seemed impossible, that surely must be illegal. 47%, 63%, one staggering 89% APR. The amounts were smaller, $2,000 here, $5,000 there, but the repayment terms were crushing. Janelle had signed them all over the past 18 months. The final documents in the folder were collection notices. Dozens of them. Computer-printed letters, with threatening language about legal action, wage garnishment, destruction of credit. Some were from law firms. The most recent, dated November 10th, 4 days before his father's funeral, came from a firm called Breslin & Associates, warning that failure to appear for a debtor's examination on November 14th at 11:30 a.m. would result in immediate judgment and asset seizure. November 14th, 11:30 a.m., 7 minutes after his father's watch alarm had gone off. Marcus sat in his dark office, surrounded by evidence of financial devastation, and finally understood his wife's panic. She hadn't been checking her watch out of boredom or disrespect. She'd been checking it because she was supposed to be somewhere else entirely at a court proceeding to explain why she couldn't pay the massive debts she'd hidden from her husband. She'd gambled that his father's funeral would provide cover, that the creditors would show mercy or grant a postponement. The alarm had reminded her she was running out of time. 11:47 a.m. later that day, Marcus waited until Janelle came home from work that afternoon. She looked exhausted, older somehow, the weight of her secrets visible in the slope of her shoulders. She found him sitting at their kitchen table, the one they'd picked out together at an estate sale in Chestnut Hill, refinished over a weekend while drinking wine and laughing with the folder of documents spread before him like accusations. Marcus, her voice broke on his name. Oh God, Marcus, how long? His voice sounded foreign to his own ears, cold and precise. How long have you been lying to me? She collapsed into the chair across from him, her face crumpling. 3 years, maybe 4, I don't even know anymore when it started to spiral. $168,000. He heard himself enumerate the betrayal with engineer's precision. Plus another $47,000 in payday loans. Interest alone is costing us thousands a month. How is this even possible? The story came out in broken pieces, extracted like shrapnel. Her mother's medical bills before she died, expenses insurance hadn't covered. Janelle's sister in Atlanta, struggling with addiction, needing money for rehab that never seemed to work. The failed attempt to invest in her friend's startup that went bankrupt. The desperate attempts to fix everything with balance transfers and consolidation loans that only made it worse. The shame that had kept her silent. The fear that had kept her juggling accounts and hiding statements. The mounting terror as the house of cards grew taller and more unstable. I was going to tell you, she whispered, tears streaming. I've been trying to fix it. That phone call at the funeral was from Breslin's office. They're threatening to put a lien on the house. Our house, Marcus. The one we built together? Marcus finished bitterly. Based on what? Based on lies? Based on love. She reached for his hands, but he pulled away. Everything else was real. My love for you, for your father, all of that was real. The debt was. It was this separate thing. This nightmare I was trapped in alone. You chose to be alone in it. His voice finally broke, releasing 9 years of trust into the space between them. You chose not to tell me. Every day for 4 years, you chose to lie. Saturday, November 23, 2024. The week after his father's burial, Marcus should have been grieving. Instead, he was meeting with a forensic accountant and a family law attorney in a glass office building overlooking the Schuylkill River. The accountant, a severe woman named Patricia Chen, had spent 3 days analyzing the couple's finances and had just presented her findings. Your joint accounts are clean, she reported, which should have been relief but felt like cold comfort. She was careful about that, but she did take out a second mortgage on the house 2 years ago, forged your signature on the paperwork. That's fraud, Mr. Bennett. Prosecutable fraud. Marcus stared at the assessment of his assets, everything he'd built, now tainted. The house had $187,000 in hidden liens against it. Their retirement accounts were protected, at least. But Pennsylvania was a marital property state. Janelle's debts, incurred during their marriage, were legally his responsibility too. My father died thinking we were happy, Marcus said quietly. That's what kills me. He died believing Janelle and I had something solid. Something real. The attorney, an older man named Gerald Hoffman, leaned forward. What do you want, Marcus? Divorce? Bankruptcy? Both? Marcus thought of his father's lessons. Build things that last. Build things you can trust. I want the truth documented, he finally said. Every debt, every lie, every forged signature. And then, I want to separate our finances completely. Legally. Permanently. 6 months later, the house in Wayne had been sold to cover the fraudulent second mortgage and the most pressing debts. Marcus moved into a smaller townhouse in Conshohocken, a place with clean lines and no memories. Janelle had declared bankruptcy and moved back to Pittsburgh to live with her aunt, working 2 jobs to satisfy the judgment against her. They weren't divorced, not yet. The legal proceedings ground forward slowly. But they weren't married either, not in any meaningful sense. Marcus had his father's watch repaired and reset the alarm to 6 a.m., his own wake-up time. He wore it every day now, a reminder of both what he'd lost and what he'd learned. That trust, once broken, revealed the cracks that had always been there. That love without honesty was just a beautiful lie. That sometimes the structures you build your life on aren't as solid as you believed, and the only choice is to clear the rubble and start again. On his desk in the new townhouse sat a framed photo from his father's funeral, just Marcus and his mother, arms around each other, facing the camera with grief-stricken faces. Janelle had been cropped out, but Marcus remembered her standing just outside the frame, checking her watch, waiting for an alarm that would signal her time had run out. It had, though not in the way she'd feared. And Marcus, standing in the ruins of his marriage and his trust, had learned his father's final lesson. Some things, once broken, can never be built back the same way. But you can build something new from what remains, something smaller, perhaps, but truer, something that would last.